Everyone, welcome. My name is Amishi Jha, and I am a faculty member in the Department of Psychology in the College of Arts and Sciences here at the University of Miami. And it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to tonight's UMindfulness lecture and conversation with Dr. Dan Goleman. So please, let's welcome Dan, not up to the stage yet, but let's welcome Dan to Miami. I'm very much looking forward to this, and before I hand it over to our esteemed speaker, I wanted to say just a few words about the momentum and support that actually allows us to all gather here today. So the UMindfulness lecture series is actually an important outreach arm for the Mindfulness Research and Practice Initiative, which is actually multi-campus-wide effort at the University of Miami and includes members from many different departments, schools, and campuses that join us in promoting both the science and research, as well as the practice of mindfulness training and contemplative practice at the campus and actually within the broader community. So this initiative was launched or founded in 2010 by a series of conversations and research projects that I was fortunate to have with one of my colleagues, Scott Rogers, who is the director of the Mindfulness in Law program in the School of Law here. And it ended up that we got a lot of momentum that really I can't even tell you how exciting it is to have all of you here today. How many of you are here? Is this your first time coming to one of the lectures? Oh my goodness, welcome. The power of Dan Goleman's Twitter account. Thank you. That is wonderful. So good. So now at least we got you in the door. You know about us. And of course, in addition to the treat tonight, we're going to have many more lectures and opportunities to get together around this topic. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you. So if you've been here before, you know that one of the things that happens is that Scott Rogers, my sort of partner in crime, typically really enjoys introducing our speaker. Now it ends up that Scott is actually not here. He is in Toronto, experiencing what we affectionately call Snowmageddon. And because of that, he wanted to contribute in some way and do what he really loves to do, which is introduce the speaker. So he sent me a video of himself transposed in time and space and introducing Dan. So we're going to play that video in a minute. Jessica, if you want to get that loaded up. But I wanted to just mention that this lecture series happens because of the generous support of one of our really key supporters, who is Mrs. Maria Kluge, who wasn't able to be here tonight, and she was at the last event. She's actually going to come back. She lives in Germany. She's going to be coming back in April, and we're going to have our next lecture as well as probably an opportunity for more retreat practice that we usually hold at the Deering Estate and open up to community as well as university faculty, staff, and students. So be on the lookout for that announcement. So Jessica, should we have Scott introduce Dan now? Okay, actually wait 1 second. One thing I wanted to mention, that we're going to do things a little bit differently than we've done in the past, which is Dan obviously will be our main event. He's going to speak to us for probably close to 20, 25, maybe half an hour. And then what we want to do is have a conversation. So I get to share the stage with him and we'll talk a little bit. Then we want to open it up broadly to questions from all of you to engage in the dialogue with us. And we'll end by Dan being available for a book signing, as well as some snacks for all of us to kind of hang out and socialize a little bit. Sound like a good plan? All right, cool. So let's roll the video.
Hi everyone, welcome. What a wonderful opportunity we had this evening to listen to and learn from someone as interesting and, from what I understand, charming as Daniel Goleman. And when I say we, I'm referring to you, because I'm here in a hotel room in Toronto where it is cold. They say it's in the minuses out there, and while that's supposedly Celsius and not Fahrenheit, so it shouldn't be such a big deal, believe me, it's very cold out there. And so I'll allow a sense of the heartwarming and joyful quality of our UMindfulness community coming together to perhaps offer me a little bit of that warming quality that I can carry with me over the next couple of days. As many of you know, Daniel Goleman is the author of the international bestseller Emotional Intelligence, a book that has very much transformed the way we understand ourselves, each other, and has infused itself into the institutions in which we live and work. Areas ranging from business to law to to psychology, to medicine, to education have become very different as a result of our deeper understanding of what this intelligence is that we carry with us and the ways in which we can draw upon a series of tools and methods for cultivating and deepening our capacities to connect and know ourselves and each other and lead and live more fulfilling and satisfying lives. In addition to being an author of emotional intelligence, Dan has written more than 10 books, most recently Triple Focus, which he co-authored with Peter Senge. And in that book, he explores more deeply the ways in which we can attend to ourselves, each other, and the world around ourselves to have a deeper, richer understanding of the landscape of this life and the work that we do. Daniel Goleman was the science writer for the New York Times for many years, in which he covered psychology and brain science, and he's really developed the capacity to take complex and challenging and in some ways not fully formed issues and to reflect on them and to share them in ways that are readily understood, appreciated, and in ways in which we can share with others to allow the transformative potential of the work that he has immersed himself in. Many years ago, his first book, The Varieties of Meditative Experience, one of my favorite books in that area, one that's inspired by William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, zeroes in on the ways in which the concentrative practice as well as mindfulness run through as a meaningful current almost all of our religious, spiritual, and contemplative traditions. And so Daniel Goleman has really explored and thought through and experienced what it is to be mindful and the ways in which mindfulness is an important part of our lives, personally and professionally. And so this evening we have the opportunity to sit back and listen and absorb the insight, the engaging way in which complex and interesting issues can be shared and learn about this area called mindfulness and the ways in which it meaningfully influences our lives and the lives of those with whom we live, love, and learn. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Goleman.
He's really articulate. He's good. Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm a little amazed to be here, and I'll tell you why. When I was in graduate school at Harvard, back in the medieval days of the 70s, I had a pre-doctoral traveling fellowship that allowed me to go to India. And I got really interested in meditation. Am I speaking into the mic? No. Okay, shall I repeat the whole thing all over again? Just to summarize. So it's the 70s, I'm at Harvard, I get this pre-doctoral traveling fellowship, it lets me go to India. I'm really interested in meditation. Unlike here now, at Harvard in the 70s, nobody had heard of meditation. It was bizarre, but I was fascinated. And I met people who were seminal in the spread of mindfulness in this culture. People like Joseph Goldstein, who founded the Insight Meditation Society, Jack Kornfield, who founded the West Coast counterpart, Spirit Rock, Sharon Salzberg, who's all over the country now, spreading compassion and loving kindness, John Kabat-Zinn, the father of mindfulness-based stress reduction. Johnny and I and another guy named Richie Davidson were buddies in Cambridge, all interested in meditation. When we were told quite candidly by our faculty advisors that this was a career-ending move. So on hearing that, I ended my career in psychology and went into science journalism. Richie, thank goodness, stayed and is now an eminent neuroscientist at Madison, where he's doing some of the most interesting research on highly advanced meditators, people who are Olympic level. They've done 15,000 and 55,000 lifetime hours. These are Tibetan yogis who come over and have their brains scanned while they do various states in the scanner. And what it shows is that there is a higher end, a spectrum of positivity that is possible in terms of brain function, changes in structure and experience that psychology had not guessed, had not realized. When I was studying clinical psychology, it was all about pathology. When I explained to my professor that I was going to do my dissertation on meditation as an intervention in stress reactivity, and that I was going to use a mantra meditation, he said, "How is a mantra any different from my obsessive compulsive patients who can't stop saying, damn, 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 damn?" I mean, he couldn't understand it. And so I did that dissertation, and I also wrote a book that Scott mentioned. It's now called The Meditative Mind. When I was in India, I tried to sort out all of the many varieties of meditation and see from a cognitive science point of view, what are they really doing? I saw them all as attempts to retrain attention. And I sorted them out into a concentrative variety and an insight variety, mindfulness being the most well-known example of that. And now I look at that book and I think, this book is remarkably uninformed. I knew so little. But at the time, you know, it helped me sort it out. So I'm very happy to hear from Amishi that she just got back from briefing the Surgeon General about mindfulness and brain health. So we've come a long way here, and here we all are. How many people in this room practice mindfulness? Can you raise your hand? Wow. Wow, okay. That's amazing, just amazing. So what I want to talk about is this newest book of mine, The Triple Focus. Oh, that's where I should be, okay. You didn't hear anything till now, right? Okay, The Triple Focus, and I'd like to explore the implications of three kinds of mindfulness, three varieties of attention that I think are absolutely essential in life. And I think that paying attention to attention is more urgent than ever because of the fact that attention is under siege. Back in the 1970s, Herbert Simon, who was an eminent cognitive scientist who won a Nobel Prize, he said, what information consumes is attention. A wealth of information means a poverty of attention. Today, these days, I saw a finding recently, the average person consumes about 5 times more information than was true 20 years ago. It's easily accessible. How many people right now are carrying a device with a screen that will let you Google anything that you might wonder about? Who does not have such a device? A minority. Yes. So it's a different information world. It's also a different world in terms of distractions. Every time we stop what we're doing and look at a text or go on the web or look at an email, we have turned over our agenda for our attention to someone else's agenda for attention. The norms for attention are changing invisibly and inevitably. And I think we need to pay real attention to this. I was on a van on Martha's Vineyard last summer. It's a shared taxi from the ferry. And there were 8 sorority sisters sharing the van with me. They were on their way to a weekend retreat. And it was night. And the minute the van started, every one of them took out a phone and started texting, I don't know what, Facebooking, but they weren't talking to each other. And this is what worries me. You'll see a toddler, clinging to her mommy or daddy, and the mommy and daddy isn't looking at the toddler, the mommy and daddy is on a device. You see toddlers who are given devices to keep them quiet. I'm worried about this. I'm quite worried about this. In 2007, Time magazine had a little squib. It said, there's a new word in English language. The word is pizzled. It's a combination of puzzled and pissed off. And It describes how you feel when the person you're with takes out their BlackBerry and starts talking to someone else. Nobody gets pizzled anymore. We don't use the word. It's the new norm. And the fact that they said BlackBerry tells you how dated that is, actually. Think about it. So I think there are three kinds of focus that we need to work harder at because they matter more than ever before. And I'm particularly interested in this book, The Triple Focus. We argue that we should be educating kids for this, to inoculate them against a very insidious social trend. The first kind of focus is an inner focus. Mindfulness is the epitome of that. It's paying attention to one's own experience. The second kind of focus is paying attention to other people. And the third kind of focus has to do with attention to the larger systems that we operate in, whether a family, an organization, or the environment. I'll go into each one of these in a little bit of detail. A while ago, I had the opportunity to visit PS 112 in Spanish Harlem. It's a very sweet school. It's first and second grade only. When you go to the door, there's a lovely older woman who greets you. She happens to be a police officer, but she feels more like mom. And it's a cozy environment. However, the kids who go to that school, almost all of them live in the huge housing project, which is around the block. And one day, for example, a second grader came in really upset. And the teacher says, "What's bothering you?" And she said, "I just saw someone who was shot." And the teacher said to the class, "How many of you know someone who's been shot?" Every hand went up. It's that kind of school. So I went there because I wanted to watch what they call belly buddies. Belly buddies happens every day. It's a ritual for these kids. One by one, they go to a cubby, they take out their favorite stuffed animal, they lie down on the floor, put the animal on their belly, and they watch it rise on the in-breath and fall on the out-breath. And they count 1, 2, 3 on the in-breath and 1, 2, 3 on the out-breath. It's a meditation. But it's for 6-year-olds, for 7-year-olds. It's a starter. The teacher said, you know, one day because of a scheduling change, we had to skip belly buddies and it was chaos. But the class that I saw was absolutely calm, absolutely focused. And I think it's because they're teaching them this fundamental way to calm yourself and pay attention. And I think that there's a technical benefit here. It's what's called in the trade cognitive control. Cognitive control is the ability to keep your mind on one thing and ignore distractions. That's the essence of mindfulness training. It's attention training. It also happens to work with the same circuitry that manages upsetting emotions. So you get a double benefit. You get calm and you get focused. And it is associated with very important abilities like learning readiness. Now, some of you may have heard of the Marshmallow Test. It's a famous experiment in psychology. It was done at Stanford with 4-year-olds from the preschool there. They're brought into a room one by one and sit down at a little table, big juicy marshmallow put in front of them, and the child is told, "You can have this marshmallow now if you want, but if you wait till I run an errand and don't eat it till I come back, you can have 2 then." Then the experimenter leaves the room. This is a predicament that tries the soul of any 4-year-old, I assure you. I've seen videos, very funny. Some kids will go up and sniff it and then jump back like it was dangerous, or sing and dance to amuse themselves. About 1/3 of the kids grab the marshmallow and eat it right away, can't help themselves. Another 1/3 wait the endless 7 or 8 minutes and they get the 2. The payoff finding comes 14 years later when these kids are graduating from high school and about to go to college. And the groups are compared, the ones who grabbed and the ones who waited. What they find is that the ones who waited get along better with their peers, still can delay gratification in pursuit of their goals, which is what this is a test of, and to everyone's amazement, have a 210-point advantage out of 1,600 on the SAT. When I told this to the people at Princeton who make the SAT, they were stunned. They said 210 points is as big or bigger than the difference we see between kids who come from a family where parents have only an elementary school education compared to those where one parent or more has a graduate degree. It's a stunning difference, but these were all the children of Stanford University graduate students and professors. So what's going on? I think it has to do with this one fundamental cognitive control. The person who did this series of experiments, the Marshmallow Test, Walter Mischel, who's now at Columbia, says this is a test of cognitive control. There was an amazing study done in New Zealand with every child born over the course of a year in one city there. And they assessed them on cognitive control from ages, I think, 4 to 11, every 2 years. They did the Marshmallow Test and all kinds of other assessments. And then they tracked them down when they were 32. And they found that cognitive control was a better predictor of how well they're doing financially and their health, and by the way, whether or not they had a prison record, than the family they grew up in or their childhood IQ. It was a stunning factor. This is an independent factor. How well children can focus in, ignore distractions, manage their impulse, matters more, think about this, than the wealth of the family you grew up in or your childhood IQ. So why don't we help children get better at this? Why doesn't every second grade classroom have belly buddies? So that's the question. And what could we do to make that happen? The second level has to do with paying attention to other people. There are basically 3 kinds of empathy, 3 ways to tune into other people. One is what's called cognitive empathy, which means I understand your perspective, I know how you think about things, I understand your mental models. This means that I can communicate very effectively with you. So it paves the way for effective communication. The second is emotional empathy. In this kind of empathy, you feel what the other person is feeling immediately, instantaneously. You don't have to think about it. You just know what they feel because you feel it too. And emotional empathy, of course, is very bonding, very connecting, very important in life. And the third kind is empathic concern. Empathic concern means it's not just that I know how you feel or how you think, but if you're in need, I care about you. It's goodwill. It's wanting to help. It's the basis for compassion. There was a classic study done in social psychology at the Princeton Theological Seminary with divinity students. The divinity students were told that they were going to do a practice sermon that they'd be evaluated on. And half of the students were given as a topic the parable of the Good Samaritan, the man who stopped to help the stranger in need by the side of the road. The other half were given random Bible topics. So time comes, each one of them prepares a little and then is told, you go to another building and give the sermon, we'll evaluate you over there. As they cross this courtyard, each of them, one by one, passes a man who's bent over and moaning in pain by the side of the road. So, question, do they stop to help? More interesting question, does it matter if you're pondering the parable of the Good Samaritan? It doesn't. Turns out, no, makes no difference. The main factor was time pressure. If you thought you were late, no way are you going to, you know. And this is the story of our lives, isn't it? We've got things to do and a long list and preoccupations and so on. But think about it. Stopping to notice the other person and then attuning to them and empathizing with them and noticing what's going on with them is the road to compassion. If you don't notice, zero compassion, zero chance. So it doesn't matter if you espouse compassion, Good Samaritan. The question is, what do you do in the actual situation? So what would a curriculum be that would help children be more compassionate, be more tuned in, be more empathic? This is another question. There's a fantastic set of what are called social emotional learning standards that the state of Illinois asked a group called the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning to develop for them. And it covers things like managing your own emotions, tuning in, self-awareness, empathy, and so on. There is none. It's wonderful because it tells you what the goals are for early elementary, late elementary, middle or high school, late high school. In other words, it maps the way the brain develops and tells you at what point children need what lesson in each of these domains. So could there be this for attention? I'd put it differently. Shouldn't there be this for attention? And shouldn't it be a standard part of a curriculum in today's reality? I'm actually asking Amishi this question because we're going to talk. Amishi, let's talk later. The third level is outer focus. There was a man named Mau Pilau who was born in Polynesia, who was the last celestial navigator. That means that he could go in an outrigger canoe across the Pacific with 0 navigational aids. He read the clouds, he read the tides, he read the stars, yes. He read nature, and that was his map. So he could go from Tahiti to Hawaii and get there. And that's what Polynesians had done for millennia. He was the last person that had held that knowledge. He learned it in the 30s and 40s from people before him who did it routinely. There was a renaissance in Polynesian culture where people started to value that kind of knowledge, and he was able to pass it on in the 80s. But until then, nobody cared. But the thing that's very telling is that in every traditional society, there has been this kind of lore. Every people has had, through human history, till recent history, has had to know how to read the local ecosystem to survive. His ecosystem happened to be the Pacific. I don't know if you remember the tsunami some years back that swept through the eastern part of Asia. There was a group in Thailand who were known as the Sea Gypsies. They were the only people who had 0 deaths during the tsunami. The reason was that they knew when the birds stopped singing and the dolphins swim out to sea, you better get the hell out. And they did. They jumped in their boats and went into the sea, and so the tsunami wave passed beneath them, and they all survived. Nobody else knew, or very few people realized that a tsunami was coming, even though all the animals fled inland. People couldn't read those signs anymore. The question is, what signs can't we read? This is not a hypothetical question, it's a real question. And it's because of what's called the Anthropocene Dilemma. We live in what geologists now call the Anthropocene Age. It's the first time in geological history when the activities of one species, ourselves, is systematically degrading the 8 global systems that support life. I'm not talking just carbon. I'm talking nitrogen, phosphorus, I'm talking usable water, biodiversity. It's all being systematically eroded. This part of my talk is a little bit of a bummer, I'm sorry, but it's important to understand. Everything that we use, this book, this piece of paper, a glass, has a sad history. And the sad history is that over its life cycle, it will have a wide spectrum of negative impacts on natural systems. We are oblivious to this. Our perceptual system during evolution was shaped to notice dangers like a rustle in the leaves that might indicate a tiger. Our visual system, for example, our auditory system, none of those systems are tuned to the macro and micro level changes that are now threatening the planet. So as a species, we are engaged in a very slow species-wide suicide that will take generations to unfold. And we remain indifferent, unalarmed, and uninformed. And I'm in the same boat. So the third level of attention that I'm interested in is the systems level. I think it's absolutely urgent and vital that we educate children particularly in this kind of awareness, and there is a way, because we face what's called technically a super wicked problem. The characteristics of a super wicked problem are that there's no single authority in charge, check. Time is running out, slowly but still, check. Official policies dismiss its importance, check. Those who need to solve the problem are caught in it, that's us, check. And it's actually a mess. These are technical terms, by the way. A mess is a super wicked problem that interacts with other super wicked problems. That's our dilemma. Now, there are some interesting signs of a way out. They're kind of prosthetics for attention. One of them is from a new discipline, which is called industrial ecology. Industrial ecology is an amalgam of the physical sciences, biological sciences, environmental sciences, industrial design, industrial engineering. And it will take, for example, a glass and say, this is not a product, this is a process. It began with some sand somewhere. And that sand would be gathered and transported and mixed with some chemicals. And those would be heated at a very high heat for a very long time, which, by the way, is a Bronze Age technology, people. Think about that. The way we make steel, cement, glass, bricks, we've been doing it the same way for 1,000 or more, 2,000, 3,000 years. I'll get to that point, but anyway. So it gets heated, and then it gets transported, we buy it, we use it, it breaks, we throw it away, it disintegrates, whatever. Industrial ecologists look at that life history and say, let's break that down systematically. There are about 2,000 steps. One of them is when you added the caustic soda to the mix to heat for the glass. Well, let's look at how you make caustic soda. In other words, they go back deeply into the history of the object, and at every point, every slice, they assess impacts on the environment, on the health of the people involved, the social situation of the people involved, you know, what kind of wage did that person get, and so on. If you look at the supply chain for this, it's like a spider web. It goes all over the world. If you look at the supply chain for almost any advanced product, it involves everywhere. So we are, if we buy and use these things, we're responsible for the impacts everywhere. So that's the really depressing part. Now, the good news is that it's not all footprints. I've been describing footprints. The footprint is the negative impacts. There's a friend of mine at the Harvard School of Public Health, Gregory Norris, who said, let's not just talk about footprints, let's look at handprints. What's a handprint? A handprint is all the things we do that reduces our footprint. He says, our goal is to be net positive, to make our handprint bigger than our footprint. He's working with 5 companies like Johnson & Johnson, Owen Corning, the big glass manufacturer, insulation manufacturer, to identify ways to go into their supply chain, change the way things are done. For example, bricks. Bricks are made by taking what? Taking mud, basically, and heating it for a long time. We make bricks, as I mentioned, the way bricks were made 3,000 years ago. Someone just invented a way to make a brick using other chemicals and other substances that uses leftover byproduct from manufacturing processes and doesn't heat it, it just cooks by itself. Well, that is going in the right direction. Greg Norris, my friend at the School of Public Health, told me he just heard about what he thinks is the first net positive product. there are maybe two, and they're both made by Ecovation. Ecovation is a company started because of two students at Rensselaer Polytech who had a course assignment to come up with a new product that was ecologically positive. And they invented a styrofoam substitute made out of, guess what? Agricultural byproducts, rice hulls, and mushroom roots. Works just as well as the other stuff. The other stuff never dies. It's death to nature. It breaks up into nurdles, it floats in circles in the middle of oceans and stuff. This styrofoam disintegrates when you're done with it. They also invented, and this is the net positive, an insulation made the same way. Well, insulation, because it's energy conserving, has a bigger and bigger and bigger handprint the longer you use it. So this is the future. Anyone in this room who has an entrepreneurial bent, this is a fantastic opportunity because we need to reinvent everything. Everything along these lines. I should be at the B school, really. So I'd love to see a systems curriculum as another level of this kind of attention. That's why we call it the triple focus. Let me just end. I am here against my better judgment in a way because I have to turn in a book Friday. The book is one I'm writing for the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday. It's called A Force for Good, the Dalai Lama's Vision for the World. And I find it very inspiring myself. But he says one thing that I want to leave you with, and that is, when we make a decision, when you make a decision, he says, ask yourself 3 questions. Who benefits? Is it just me or a group? Is it just my group or everyone? And is it just for now or for the future? Thank you.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you just did this for us, is that, you know, the beginning of your talk was filled with sort of inspiration and possibilities. How might we train kids to improve their own attention? And if we have a way to do that, it's a game changer. And then we took a turn toward the end, which is really like the magnitude of the problem is massive, right? So help us connect the dots a little bit.
Well, Amishi, I think that all of these levels operate all the time. So we're constantly managing our inner, ourselves. And that determines how well we can interact with other people. That along with our empathy, the second level. And it's just, any relationship is a system. I talked about the mega systems, but this is a system. You and me talking. A marriage is a system. A family is a system. Any relationship is a system. So you need to have all 3 capabilities, I would say, in order to thrive.
Okay. I would agree.
Okay.
So was there something in particular that you wanted to...
Yeah. Yeah.
I gotta go.
Yeah, so I'm really grappling with what would a curriculum for attention at these 3 levels look like? And since this is your game, I thought I'd ask you. For example, just a little more detail, as you know, I've been very involved with social emotional learning, which is applied emotional intelligence. And the learning standards that I mentioned in Illinois are developmentally appropriate. So as the brain grows, you can teach kids different and more developed capacities. What would that look like for attention? Particularly for mindfulness.
I mean, I think that the challenges right now are that we are both learning more and more about the nature of how attention develops. Mm-hmm. So there is an ongoing developmental neuroscience that's teaching us about things. But some of my colleagues might say we have somewhat of a handle on that, that basically this frontoparietal network that controls cognitive control doesn't fully develop till we're around 25. So so in some sense, the system is still malleable till we get to that age, and that means that there may be an opportunity to actually have an impact on it, to strengthen it a little bit earlier on, to kind of exponentially grow it. The other side of it might be that there's a reason that cognitive control doesn't fully develop till we're 25. Because you want a system that actually allows exploration without narrowing down on things so that you become fixed on the way things should be done. So you want more flexibility in the system to learn different options without controlling the direction that one might take. So it is a little bit tricky to figure that out. One area that I would say I'm very interested in is not so much how to expedite normal development, but how we might protect against situations that cause attention to be at risk. And that is probably the bulk of what we do in my lab. So most of my lab's work looks at using mindfulness training, using contemplative training to help people that are in high stress, high stakes situations, and mostly these are active duty military. And what we know in people in high stakes circumstances where there's protracted periods of high demand for months, that their attention is compromised. And going through that period itself degrades the available capacity. And when we think about risk and resilience in children, I would say it's the same thing.
Absolutely. I was thinking these kids in the projects are living in that situation.
Exactly. So I don't even think we need to get into the more debatable issues around you don't want to overdevelop cognitive control too early because there might be problems associated with that, like delayed language learning, et cetera. Because we're dealing with people that are not even at sort of normal levels because of the nature of the high demand, challenging circumstances that they engage in. And what I'll tell you is I'll just give you a result from one of the studies that we actually did. This was a collaboration with some folks at NYU in the nursing school. And what they did is that they partnered with the juvenile justice system to basically enroll participants the moment the child arrived into the system. And they were there for a long period of time, several months. And they allowed some of the children to go through the normal programs, but the other group of kids actually got a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy variant of the normal program. And my role was to track their attention. So what happens from the moment they get in to about eight weeks later to their attention. What we found is that the treatment as usual group, in fact, the entirety of the group, degraded in their attentional capacity as we went over the 8 weeks. So 8 weeks of just being in the juvenile justice system compromises cognitive control, the very system that probably led them to be part of the juvenile justice system. So in some sense, we are removing the whole muscle that's going to help them grow to get out of there. What was the good news? The good news was that the people that got the mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy actually improved their attention. And the kids that actually practiced more on their own, because they had the opportunity to practice what they wanted outside of the classroom, they improved even beyond that. So that was that first step of hopefulness. Like there are ways we can offer things to people that are at risk. So that's the way I would answer it. I would say that it's not so much around necessarily fast-tracking normal development, but really offering options for when development itself is compromised.
Yeah, I see it as leveling the playing field for kids that otherwise are going to go in the wrong direction. Another question.
Wait a second. Who invited you?
Well, you know, I'm a journalist, so this is a setup. All I do is I have no answers, just questions. So you and I
were... ask you one back?
You know, just let me ask this.
Just one. Okay.
Yeah. So you and I were both at a meeting where Tanya Singer presented some data that showed that the different kinds of empathy that I described activate different circuitry in the brain, and that you can enhance them by training, but independently of each other. And this goes beyond mindfulness and cognitive control into the realm of empathy. Does any of your work speak to that, or have you thought about doing any of that?
Absolutely. In fact, so the question is just, you know, cognitive mindfulness training, you might say, is sort of the cold workhorse, and compassion training is sort of the heart, right? I would say that I don't I don't agree with that view, because I do think that even in the context of a typical mindfulness exercise, where you might say, let's say mindfulness of breathing, where you say, pay attention to the sensations of breathing. When your mind wanders, gently return it. That act of how you treat yourself in the moment that you realize that your mind wandered is essentially an opportunity to practice self-compassion. So I do see that heartfulness and mindfulness, and John Kabat-Zinn talks a lot about this, are really deeply intertwined, and that the realm of cold cognition and affective function and regulation are deeply interrelated. But more explicitly, I do think that combining programs that have a mindfulness focus and a compassion focus can be very helpful. Yeah. And some of the work we've been doing, so as I mentioned, most of my work is with high stress groups and mostly active duty military. I'm a brave woman, but I was not going to start working with active duty infantry and ask them to engage in compassion training. It was just not the way I was going to start, because mindfulness just had more of an appeal for, okay, yeah, I want to be more situationally aware, and that's where I'm going to go. Though when it comes down to it, compassion is a very powerful tool for everybody. But what we decided to do is actually, in the work we're doing with active duty military spouses, we are now combining mindfulness and compassion. And what's very powerful is that those same practices that we're offering the spouses, they're like, yeah, my husband took my CD, he's doing it with his whole unit. So it's pretty interesting to see how it's actually going back to the military via the spouses. And in many ways, I would say the spouses are the heart of the military, so it makes a lot of sense to me.
This makes me think of something I learned long ago, which is that there's a huge amount of caring and love within a platoon. At the local level, your buddies or your family. And I could see using loving kindness there. Oh, absolutely. But in doing this book with the Dalai Lama, he said something that really surprised me, but I'll share it with you because I think it's very relevant. He said, we need compassionate soldiers. What he means is that in the fog of war, you can do a lot of things. But if you're mindful and if you're compassionate, there will be less collateral damage. So I think that's an interesting argument for teaching compassion. Exactly.
Imagine that, the Dalai Lama gets it. So actually, now I'm going to ask you a question.
Oh, sure. Okay. Fire away.
So actually, I'm glad you mentioned the Dalai Lama, because that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. So you were there from the beginning. I mean, the group that you're on the board of, the Mind and Life Institute, actually is the group that I would credit to being the 30-year facilitator of these dialogues between scientists and contemplative practitioners, and in particular, the Dalai Lama. So, I mean, partly I'm just curious, like, how has it been for 30 years? I mean, what have you seen change in the nature of his response to it and your kind of viewing that relationship? That was one thing. And the other part of it was, what did you think we were going to learn from the contemplative practitioners and experts, as somebody that was trained in Western psychology?
Sure. Well, let me start with the second question, and by the time I answer it, I will have forgotten the first, so I'll ask you what that was. So, when I went to India, I was stunned to meet people who were highly advanced meditators, yogis, lamas, who were qualitatively different from anybody I had met before. They were utterly present, continually happy and upbeat, very caring and compassionate, and lived very simple lives. And I thought it was very important that people in the West understand this human possibility, because it was several standard deviations different than the norm that I knew. Of course, when I got back to Harvard, nobody cared. But it didn't really stop things. It was really the start of things, as you say, because John Kabat-Zinn was beginning to teach MBSR, and the Insight Meditation Society and so on started. So it slowly grew, and at a certain point, I don't know how it happened, suddenly this culture was ready to hear. And it took a lot of strands for that to happen. Now, one of those strands, as you mentioned, was the series of dialogues that began in the 1980s with the Dalai Lama and scientists. I was present at the second one, which was in 1989. And during that dialogue, the Dalai Lama learned one day that he had just won the Nobel Peace Prize. Did he cancel his meeting with scientists that day? No. He said, okay, if we have to have a press conference, we'll do it at the end of the day. In other words, this was a very high priority for him from the start. He was interested in science, you know, as a kid in Lhasa when there was no science, there was nothing. And one of the first things that he did on coming to the West was make an intentional effort to meet with scientists. And the book that I'm doing, for example, his vision is not religious-based at all. It's not Buddhist, it's not faith-based, it's science-based. And so his attitude has been the same straight through. I think what's changed is the attitude of scientists toward talking to this guy, because they realize that they may have something to learn from him too, instead of just being tutors.
Cool.
Yeah. So, should we go home?
Should we go home? Well, let's do one more.
Okay,
Let's
sure.
do one more thing. All right, so you have done something that I will never be able to do, and that is, you were on the Colbert Report.
Oh, yeah.
It's no longer on TV. So part of what I wanted to ask you is that, you know, as somebody that, it's kind of a, maybe it's a little bit personal question, but, you know, and I think it relates to the way the Dalai Lama handled the Nobel Prize, but just as we negotiate life and the spotlight, and whatever the realm is, but being somebody that has a stake in it for him or herself, at the same time, understanding that that edge, that ego-driven, self-focused edge is not going to ultimately lead to fulfillment. That at some point it's going to fall apart. And I think it's tied to your three levels, right? I mean, beyond even concern for myself and awareness for myself, there are those around me and the world around me that I must relate to. So I just was curious, how do you kind of negotiate that? And how does reporting on this topic, as well as having success reporting on this topic, how does your own practice have an impact on you?
Sure. Well, let's start with the Colbert Report.
Yeah.
I was terrified. Oh my God. I was waiting in that green room. I was just, you know, and Colbert comes in character. He never breaks character. You know, he's a Catholic Sunday school teacher in his real life, but in character, he's an absolute asshole. So he comes in, and, you know, I was like frozen in fear. But his producer came in and she said, okay, look, here's the deal. His writers give him 5 jokes and he has to tell 3 of them during the segment. Your job is to not to be funny, but to treat him like someone who's drunk. And then knowing that, I practiced. I did some meditation, and then the time came to go on. And the first thing he did, in the Colbert Report, if any of you are Colbert fans, it turns out they film much longer than they show. They edit it because it's taped in the afternoons, that time to do that. The first thing he did when I came in and sat down was to flip me the bird and say, I don't give an F what you say. So that was the like, okay, my terror was totally justified, right?
Wow.
So I think the only thing that saved me was my practice. Because, you know, I have not dared to look at it, but I understand I was calm.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Yeah. So I would say that probably at this point in life, which is past normal retirement age, although I'm not retired, I think that practice is, in a way, my biggest learning process and most important agenda. I'd like to be on retreat quite a lot, actually, more than my life scheduling allows. And basically, I'd like to be like the Dalai Lama when I grow up.
All right, on that note, thank you very much. All right, so if anybody has questions, there are microphones actually. Jessica, raise your hand. There's Jessica and Manuela, so call them over if you would like to ask a question.
There's one here, some here.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much for that. My question is about what you were speaking about earlier, Dr. Goleman. You were mentioning that you're worried about attention, and you're worried about the ecosystem and our impact on it, and how we're having a negative one. And yeah, I guess, hold on, mindful update, I am nervous. But I'll try to bring it back. Yeah, basically, I've been learning a lot about the philosophy of mindfulness recently. You know, like the whole idea of being non-judgmental and nothing really is good or bad. And I'm just curious what you would say to sort of, you know, taking that philosophy into account. I guess it just seems to me like we shouldn't think that our impact on the environment is necessarily bad. It's just that it's an impact, and that maybe we should just...
Yeah, I understand. I totally disagree. Yeah, I think that it's a misunderstanding of the instruction to be non-judgmental about your own experience, to extrapolate that and be non-judgmental about anything in the world. We must have an ethical stance, and it must be pro-life in the broadest sense of that word, not the narrow sense. That's why I think mindfulness requires compassion, an ethic of compassion as well. And compassion is not just for ourselves, not just for the people we care about, it's for everybody, everywhere, and into the future. And if that's the case, then we must care about the environmental impact.
Beautiful. My name is Colbert Report, and I have a company that is committed to training children and teachers and caregivers in mindfulness, yoga-based education. And my commitment for the world is that we implement this all around for the evolution and the safety of our planet and us as a species. So my question is, all of the research and the success that you have created in this social emotional learning model has many elements of mindfulness in it. So how can we piggyback off of that success? And the awareness of the importance of it is growing, and yet at the same time, those who are part of the solution are also part of the involved in it, as you said. So.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to that copy of The Triple Focus, my new book, but
Oh, it's right there.
it is an argument for exactly what you're saying. In this book I say, well, you know, I realized that mindfulness was embedded in emotional intelligence. I just didn't think about it. So here I'm drawing that out. I'm saying, yes, it should be part of a standard mindfulness curriculum, a social emotional learning curriculum. And those courses are very widespread now, and the meta-analysis of them is very positive. You may know the data. They've looked at about 200 studies comparing kids who have these programs in self-awareness, self-management, empathy, social skill, versus kids that don't. About 270,000 students in the meta-analysis, and they found that the program lowered antisocial behavior by about 10%, which is huge in such a large sample, raised positive behavior like I like school and good attendance, 10%, and increased academic achievement scores by 11%. And I think mindfulness would only strengthen that curriculum. So that argument is made in this book. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
My name is Paula DeFranco, and I'm an executive MBA student here at the university. And first of all, I want to thank you. On a very personal level, I was talking to my 80-year-old mother the other day about how cognitive intelligence really falls to the wayside when there isn't a compatible emotional intelligence. And I cited our family generationally the way we had come forward. Now, going back to what you had discussed earlier, something I've noticed as a practitioner and as a student in leadership, authentic leadership and management, it seems to me that if the adults who are taking these courses are only taking them theoretically and not applying them practically off the mat in everyday instance, then how are the school-age children who learn best by modeling to absorb this? Because children do learn what they live, and it's not, you can't fake it. When you're mindful, you're present, and it shows in everything you do. So how do we cultivate these so that it becomes almost a seed that's planted early on? Thank you.
Yeah, in the social emotional learning world, the best practices include working with families too. And I think that it should be true with mindfulness, should be true in any program that's trying to instill positive habits in kids, not just more knowledge. And when it comes to leadership, the mark of the authentic leader is that you're the same person everywhere.
Yeah.
Speak into the mic.
Oh, okay. Thank you. My question is piggyback off her question on mindful leadership. One of the areas I focus in corporate America, I've taken the concept, and I applaud you, thank you so much for emotional intelligence, because that's something that I have driven through in the company to get them to understand the importance of, when we talk about a sensitive topic like diversity, I use that as part of the platform for conversation. I've evolved that into what we call the concept of unconscious bias in attentiveness. I'm wondering how much of this mindfulness you've been able to drill in, and is the corporate function or corporate world receptive to mindfulness?
You know, I was just telling Amishi, what actually brought me down to Miami was I did a seminar for Cisco Systems. They're top 250 high potential managers from around the world. And I talked about leadership, and I included why mindfulness is an important skill for leader. And then the next person was a woman named Shauna Shapiro, who led them in mindfulness. They loved it. My friend Meng at Google, I'm sure you know, has brought mindfulness-based emotional intelligence to Google and then beyond. And I think there's huge receptivity in the corporate world for a lot of reasons. One, I think, is because people are so stressed continually, and this is a way to manage stress. And another is it enhances attention, it helps people. My son is the publisher of this book. He has a company called More Than Sound. They meditate together every day, and it's a very harmonious workplace. And I think part of it is that. So I think there are lots of reasons why businesses are seeing first the business value, but also the human value of the practice.
I think we should just take one more.
Sure.
Yeah. Who's got the mic? Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
You described 3 types of empathy. The last one was empathic concern. And I would like to get your advice for those who have too much of it and how to deal with that. Because there are times in life that you may feel paralyzed by the concern.
Yes.
So I wonder if you can help those people who may get blocked by what they're saying.
You know, it's interesting. There's a lot of work on this area what's called empathy distress. Empathy distress occurs when you're the opposite of tuned out. You're so tuned in that you practically absorb the other person's pain and distress. It's a huge problem in professions like nursing, for example, where you're around people who are angry and frustrated and in pain all the time. And the problem is, how can you attune to people and care and not be overwhelmed? The answers are not tuning out, because then you don't care. The answer is to be able to metabolize the emotional distress you're picking up. And what turns out to be a very positive way of doing that is this loving kindness practice that Amishi was talking about. And this is Tanya Singer's work at the Max Planck Institute. She found that if you did loving kindness, where you, and many people put this at the end of the mindfulness session, where you genuinely wish the best, health, happiness, and so on, to everyone in your life and to yourself, that it activates the mammalian circuit for parenting and for love. If you love the person, you will stay present to them and still care, but you won't tune out of their distress. And it helps you not be overwhelmed by the distress. That's the finding. So on that note, love, sweet love, thank you very much.